Chapter 1. Starting from Scratch. This chapter focuses on the foundational mindset and initial steps to take when beginning a new design project, emphasizing process over premature polish. Start with a feature, not a layout. When you start designing a new application, it's a common mistake to begin with the overall structure, like the navigation bar or sidebar. This often leads to frustration because you don't yet have enough information to make those big decisions. Instead, begin with a single core feature. For instance, if you're building a flight booking app, start by designing the Search for a Flight function. This requires creating fields for departure and destination cities, dates, and a search button. By focusing on a concrete piece of functionality first, you build momentum and make subsequent decisions about the overall layout much easier, as they will be informed by the features you've already designed. Detail comes later. In the earliest stages of design, don't get bogged down in the minor details like choosing the perfect font, color palette, or shadow style. These elements are important eventually, but they are a distraction at the beginning. A great way to avoid this is to work in low fidelity. You can even start with a thick marker and paper to sketch out layouts, which physically prevents you from obsessing over details. When you move to a digital tool, start by designing in grayscale. This forces you to establish a strong and clear visual hierarchy using only spacing, size, and contrast. A design that works well in black and white can easily be enhanced with color later on. Remember that these initial sketches and wireframes are disposable tools to help you explore ideas quickly. Don't design too much. Trying to design every feature and anticipate every edge case before you start building is a recipe for paralysis. It's incredibly difficult to solve complex design problems in the abstract. The best approach is to work in short design and build cycles. 1. Design a simple core version of the next feature. 2. Build it and make it functional. 3. Interact with the real working feature to uncover unexpected design challenges and edge cases. 4. Iterate on the design in the browser or app until it's polished. 5. Move on to the next feature. This iterative process is far more efficient than trying to perfect everything up front. As a rule, be a pessimist. Design the smallest, most useful version of a feature that you can confidently ship. Add the nice-to-have extras in a later cycle. Choose a personality. Every design communicates a certain personality, whether it's professional and serious or fun and playful. This feeling isn't magic, it's the result of several concrete design decisions working together. Typography. Fonts have a huge impact. Serif fonts, like Times New Roman, can feel classic and elegant. Rounded sans serif fonts often feel modern and playful. Neutral sans serif fonts, like Helvetica, are a safe, versatile choice. Color. Colors evoke emotion. Blue is often seen as safe, corporate, and trustworthy. Gold can suggest luxury and sophistication. Pink can feel fun and less serious. Border radius. The roundness of corners has a surprising effect. Sharp, 90-degree corners feel formal and serious. A large border radius makes elements feel softer and more playful. A subtle, small radius is a neutral middle ground. The key is to be consistent. Language. The words you use are a critical part of the design. Formal language, please provide a phone number to confirm your identity, feels professional, whereas casual language, just to make sure this is really you, where can we send a code, feels friendly and approachable. Limit your choices. While having endless options might seem like a good thing, it often leads to decision paralysis and inconsistency. Agonizing over whether a shadow should have 10% or 15% opacity is a waste of time. The solution is to create systems and constraints for yourself. Instead of picking values from an infinite pool, define a limited set of options in advance. Define systems. Create a predefined color palette with a handful of shades for each color. Establish a type scale with a limited number of font sizes, e.g. 12px,
14px, 16px, 20px, and 24px. Do the same for spacing, font weights, shadows, and any other property you find yourself tweaking. Simplify decisions. With a system in place, decision-making becomes a process of elimination. To choose an icon size, you might only have 4 options: 12px, 16px, 24px, or 32px. It's much easier to see which of these few distinct options works best than to pick the perfect value out of thin air. This approach not only speeds up your workflow, but also creates a more cohesive and professional-looking design.
Chapter 2. Hierarchy is everything. This chapter explains that the most critical aspect of a well-designed interface is a clear visual hierarchy, which guides the user's attention to what's most important. Not all elements are equal. One of the biggest factors in making a design look good is visual hierarchy. This refers to how important each element appears in relation to the others. An interface where everything is styled with the same emphasis feels chaotic and noisy, like a wall of text where nothing stands out. To create hierarchy, you must be intentional. Emphasize the primary information and de-emphasize the secondary and tertiary information. When you do this, the design immediately becomes clearer, more organized, and more pleasant to look at, even if the fonts, colors, and layout haven't changed. Size isn't everything. A common mistake is to rely solely on font size to create hierarchy. This often results in headings that are excessively large and secondary text that is too small to be comfortably read. Instead of just changing size, use a combination of tools. Font weight. Making text bolder is often more effective at communicating importance than just making it bigger. It adds emphasis without drastically altering the layout. Color. A dark, high-contrast color for primary text. For secondary information, like a date or a subtitle, use a lighter shade of gray to make it recede. A good starting point is to establish a simple system: 2 or 3 text colors, a primary dark, a secondary gray, and a tertiary light gray. And 2 font weights, a normal weight for most text and a bolder weight for emphasis. Don't use gray text on colored backgrounds. Using light gray text to de-emphasize it works beautifully on a white background. However, this trick fails on colored backgrounds, where gray text often looks dull and washed out. The principle at play isn't the color gray itself, but reduced contrast. To de-emphasize text on a colored background, don't just make it gray. Instead, you have 2 better options. 1. Use a desaturated version of the background color. The best approach is to create a color for your text that has the same hue as the background, but is lighter and less saturated. This creates a harmonious, low-contrast effect that still feels vibrant. 2. Use white text with reduced opacity. This is a quick fix, but be careful. It can make the text look faded or even disabled, and if the background is an image, the image will show through the text. Emphasize by de-emphasizing. Sometimes you'll find that an element you want to highlight just isn't standing out, no matter how much you try to emphasize it. In these situations, the solution is often to look at the surrounding elements. Instead of trying to make the important element shout louder, make everything else whisper. For example, to make the active link in a navigation bar pop, don't just make it bold and colorful. Also make the inactive links a lighter, less obtrusive gray. By de-emphasizing the competition, the active item naturally rises to the top of the visual hierarchy. Labels are a last resort. When you're displaying data, it's easy to fall into the trap of using a simple label value format for everything. This approach is often unnecessary and makes it hard to establish any kind of hierarchy. Before adding a label, consider these alternatives. Rely on format and context. You often don't need a label because the data speaks for itself. 555 123 4567 is clearly a phone number. Senior developer, written under someone's name, is clearly their job title. Combine labels and values. Instead of writing status in stock, you could write 12 left in stock. This integrates the information more naturally and is easier to style effectively. De-emphasize the label. If you absolutely must use a label, for example, in a dense data table, treat it as secondary information. The data itself is the hero. Make the label smaller, a lighter color, or use a lighter font weight than the value it describes. Separate visual hierarchy from document hierarchy. On the web, we use heading tags like H1, H2, etc. to create a semantic structure for the content. By default, browsers render these with progressively smaller font sizes. It's crucial not to let these default styles dictate your visual design. A section title like Account Settings might be an H1 for accessibility and SEO, but visually, it might function more like a small, subtle label. The content within that section is what's truly important, so the title shouldn't steal the show. Feel free to style your semantic tags however you need to create the best visual hierarchy, even if that means making an H1 small and gray. Balance weight and contrast. The visual weight of an element refers to how much it stands out. Bold text, for instance, has more weight than regular text because it uses more pixels. This principle is important when combining different types of elements like icons and text. Icons and text. Solid icons are visually very heavy. If you place a dark, solid icon next to text of the same color, the icon will often feel overpowering. Since you can't change the weight of an icon, you need to balance it by lowering its contrast. Make the icon a lighter color than the text to make them feel visually equal. Borders. Conversely, sometimes you have a low contrast element, like a very thin, light gray border that is too subtle. Instead of making it darker, which can make the design look harsh, you can increase its weight by making it thicker, e.g. 2px instead of 1px. This adds emphasis while maintaining a soft look. Semantics are secondary for actions. When designing actions like buttons, their visual hierarchy is more important than their semantic meaning, e.g. destructive or positive. Most pages have a pyramid of actions. 1. Primary action. This is the single most important thing you want the user to do. It should be the most visually prominent button, typically with a solid, high-contrast background color. 2. Secondary actions. These are less common actions. They should be clear but not overpowering. Outline styles or buttons with lower contrast backgrounds work well. 3. Tertiary actions. These are the least important or least common actions. They should be discoverable but unobtrusive. Styling them to look like simple links is usually the best approach. This means that a destructive action like delete account shouldn't automatically be a big, bold red button. If it's not the primary action on the page, it should be styled as a secondary or tertiary action. You can save the prominent red styling for the final confirmation dialog, where delete becomes the primary action. Chapter 3. Layout and Spacing. This chapter covers the principles of using space effectively to create clean, organized, and easy-to-understand layouts. Start with too much white space. One of the quickest and most effective ways to improve a cluttered design is to simply give every element more room to breathe. When elements are crammed together, the interface feels busy and stressful. A common mistake is to add spacing only when something looks too tight. This additive approach usually results in the bare minimum amount of space needed. A better strategy is to work in reverse. Start by giving elements way too much white space and then remove it until the layout feels balanced. What seems like too much space when you're focused on a single element often turns out to be just right in the context of the full page. Of course, some interfaces, like data-dense dashboards, need to be compact, but this should be a deliberate design decision, not the default. Establish a spacing and sizing system.
To create consistent and harmonious layouts, you shouldn't be making arbitrary decisions about spacing and sizing, like choosing between a 120px or 125px width. This is slow and leads to inconsistency. Instead, create a predefined spacing and sizing scale. A linear scale, e.g. multiples of 4px, isn't ideal because a 4px difference is huge for small elements but completely unnoticeable for large ones. A good scale should have smaller gaps between values at the low end and progressively larger gaps as the values increase. A practical approach is to start with a base value, 16px is a great choice as it's the default browser font size, and build your scale using multiples and fractions of that base. For example, 4px, 0.25x, 8px, 0.5x, 12px, 0.75x, 16px, 1x, 24px, 1.5x, 32px, 2x, 48px, 3x, 64px, 4x, etc. Using a system like this makes decisions fast and easy. If 24px of margin isn't enough, the next value in your scale, 32px, is probably perfect. You don't have to fill the whole screen. Just because you're designing on a wide monitor doesn't mean your content needs to stretch to fill the entire screen. Forcing content into an unnecessarily wide layout often makes it harder to use and read. Give each element only the space it truly needs. If a form is most usable at a width of 600px, let it be 600px, even on a 1400px screen. A little extra empty space around the edges is a good thing. This also applies to different sections on a single page. Not every element needs to be full width just because the navigation bar is. If you're finding it difficult to design a narrow component on a wide canvas, try designing for mobile first. A smaller canvas forces you to make smart, constrained decisions. You can then adapt that design for larger screens, and you'll often find that less needs to change than you think.
Grids are overrated. While grid systems, like a 12-column grid, can be helpful, blindly adhering to them can cause more problems than it solves. Grids are fundamentally about using relative, percentage-based widths. The problem is that not all elements should have a relative width. For example, a sidebar in a layout doesn't usually need to get wider as the screen gets wider. Its content has an optimal fixed width. Giving it a percentage-based width, e.g. 25% of the screen, means it will either be too wide on large screens or too cramped on smaller ones. A better approach is to give the sidebar a fixed width, e.g. 280px, and let the main content area be fluid, filling the remaining space. Similarly, an element like a login card has an optimal size. Instead of making its width a percentage of the screen, give it a maxed width, e.g. 500px, so it never gets too big, and let it shrink only when the screen becomes narrower than that width. Don't be a slave to the grid. Relative sizing doesn't scale. It's a tempting idea that all elements in an interface should scale proportionally. For example, if your headline is 2.5 times the size of your body text on a desktop, you might think that relationship should hold true on mobile. This is a fallacy. The relationship between sizes changes at different screen sizes. Large elements on a desktop screen need to shrink at a much faster rate than small elements. A 45px headline on desktop might become a 24px headline on mobile, while the 18px body text only shrinks to 14px. The size difference becomes less extreme on smaller screens. This principle also applies to the properties within a single component. For a button, you might want more generous padding on a large button and disproportionately tighter padding on a small button. This makes the different sizes feel distinct and intentional, rather than just zoomed in or zoomed out versions of each other. Let go of the idea that everything needs to scale perfectly. Avoid ambiguous spacing. When you use spacing to group related items, the rule is simple. The space between elements within a group should be less than the space between the groups. This is a common issue in many places. Forms. The space between a label and its input field should be smaller than the space between that input field and the next label. This clearly connects each label to its corresponding input. Headings. The space between a section heading and the paragraph that follows it should be less than the space between that heading and the paragraph that precedes it. This ties the heading to the content it introduces. Lists. The space between list items should be greater than the line height of the text within a single list item, especially if items wrap onto multiple lines. Ambiguous spacing forces the user to work harder to understand the structure of the interface. Clear spacing makes it effortless. Chapter 4. Designing Text. Text is a fundamental part of any interface. This chapter provides tactical advice for making your typography clean, clear, and professional. Establish a type scale. Just as with spacing, you shouldn't choose font sizes arbitrarily. Doing so leads to inconsistency and slows you down. Instead, you need a type scale, a predefined and limited set of font sizes to use throughout your project. A simple, practical approach is to handpick the values. You have full control and can choose round, pixel-perfect numbers. A good, versatile scale for most UI projects might look something like this: 12px, 14px, 16px, 18px, 20px, 24px, 30px, 36px, 48px, 60px, 72px. This gives you enough options to create a clear hierarchy without being so restrictive that you feel like you're missing a useful size. When implementing your scale, use px or rem units, not m units. M units are relative to their parent's font size, which can lead to nested elements having computed font sizes that are not actually part of your defined scale. Use good fonts. Choosing a good typeface can be intimidating. Here are a few shortcuts to help you make great choices without being a typography expert. Play it safe. For UI design, a neutral sans serif font is almost always a safe bet. You can even rely on the system font stack, -Apple-System, Segoe UI, Roboto, etc. This uses the native font of the user's operating system, which feels familiar and performs well. Look for many weights. Typefaces that come in many different weights, e.g., thin, light, regular, medium, semi-bold, bold, black, are generally crafted with more care and attention to detail. When browse font libraries, filter for families with at least 5 or more weights. Optimize for legibility. Fonts designed for headlines often have tighter letter spacing and shorter lowercase letters, X height. Fonts designed for body text are the opposite. For UI body text, choose fonts with taller X heights and wider letter spacing. Trust the crowd. If a font is extremely popular, it's probably for a good reason. Sorting by popularity in font directories is a great way to find high-quality options. Steal like an artist. Inspect the websites and apps you admire to see what fonts they're using. Well-designed products are often made by teams who have already put a lot of thought into their typography. Keep your line length in check. For body text to be comfortable to read, the lines should not be too long or too short. Lines that are too long make it hard for the reader's eye to find the start of the next line. The optimal line length for readability is between 45 and 75 characters per line. On the web, you can achieve this by setting a max width on your text blocks. A good rule of thumb is to use a max width between 20 and 35 m. An m is a unit relative to the font size, so this measurement scales appropriately if you change the size of your text. Even if your layout has a wider content area, constrain your paragraphs to this optimal width for the best reading experience. Baseline, not center. When you have text of different sizes on the same line, for example, a large heading next to a smaller link, your first instinct might be to vertically center align them. This often looks slightly awkward because their centers don't align with their visual weight. A much better approach is to align them by their baseline. The baseline is the invisible line that letters sit on. Aligning different font sizes by this shared line
creates a more stable, harmonious, and professional look because you're using an alignment reference that our eyes naturally perceive. Line height is proportional. Line height, the space between lines of text, is not one size fits all. A common recommendation is a line height of 1.5, but the optimal value depends on the context. Line height and line length. The longer the lines of text, the more line height you need. Wider paragraphs require a taller line height, perhaps as high as 2.0, to help the reader's eye return to the correct next line. Narrow content can use a shorter line height, around 1.5. Line height and font size. The relationship here is inverse. Smaller text needs more line height to improve legibility. As text gets larger, like in a headline, the letters themselves are more distinct, so you need less line height. For very large headlines, a line height of 1.0 or even slightly less can look perfectly fine. Not every link needs a color. In a block of paragraph text, a link needs to stand out, so making it blue and underlined is standard practice. However, in an interface where almost everything is a link, like in a navigation menu or a list of items, styling every single one to pop can be visually overwhelming. Instead, for navigation and other link-heavy areas, use more subtle ways to indicate clickability. You could simply use a darker color, a heavier font weight, or only add an underline on hover. For truly secondary links, you might not even need any default styling at all, relying on a hover state to signal that it's interactive. This helps preserve the visual hierarchy and keeps the focus on the primary actions. Align with readability in mind. For languages that read left to right, the vast majority of your text should be left-aligned. Other alignments have their place, but should be used carefully. Centered text. This works well for short headlines or small, isolated blocks of text. Never center-align long paragraphs, more than 2 or 3 lines. The ragged left edge makes it very difficult to read.
Right-aligned text. This is generally hard to read, with one important exception: numbers. In a table, right-aligning numbers, especially those with decimals, makes them much easier to scan and compare. Justified text. This creates clean left and right edges, which can look formal and polished like in a newspaper. However, on the web, it can create awkward, uneven gaps between words. If you use justified text, you should also enable hyphenation to break words across lines and reduce these gaps. Use letter spacing effectively. Letter spacing, or tracking, is the space between characters. In most cases, you should trust the typeface's designer and leave the default letter spacing alone. However, there are 2 situations where adjusting it can improve your design. 1. Tightening headlines. Some fonts are designed for body text and have naturally wide letter spacing for legibility at small sizes. If you use such a font for a large headline, the spacing can feel too loose. In this case, slightly decreasing the letter spacing can give the headline a tighter, more polished look. 2. Improving all caps legibility. Lowercase letters have a lot of visual variety: ascenders, descenders, different shapes. All caps text is monotonous because every letter has the same height. This can make it harder to read. To compensate, you should slightly increase the letter spacing for all caps text to improve its legibility. Chapter 5. Working with Color. This chapter provides a practical system for choosing and applying colors to build a rich, consistent, and user-friendly interface. Ditch hex for HSL. While hex and RGB are common color formats, they are not intuitive. Colors that look similar visually can have completely different hex codes. A much better format for UI design is HSL, hue, saturation, lightness, because it describes color in a way that humans can understand. Hue. This is the color's position on the 360-degree color wheel, e.g., 0 degrees is red, 120 degrees is green, 240 degrees is blue. It's the pure color. Saturation.
This is the intensity or vividness of the color from 0% grayscale to 100% fully saturated. Lightness. This is how light or dark the color is, from 0% pure black to 100% pure white. 50% lightness gives you the purest version of a given hue. Using HSL makes it incredibly easy to create variations of a color. Need a lighter blue? Just increase the lightness. Need a more vibrant blue? Increase the saturation. You need more colors than you think. Simple 5-color palette generators are a seductive but ultimately useless tool for real UI design. To build a functional product, you need a much more comprehensive palette. A good color system can be broken down into 3 categories. 1. Grays. The vast majority of any interface, text, backgrounds, panels, borders is composed of grays. You'll need a full range of them, from a very dark gray, not pure black, which can look harsh, to an off-white. Aim for 8 to 10 shades to give you enough options. 2. Primary colors. This is your main brand color used for primary buttons, active links, and key accents. Most sites need 1 or 2 primary colors. Like with grays, you need a full range of 5 to 10 shades for each, from a very light version for tinted backgrounds to a very dark version for text. 3. Accent colors. These are used to communicate specific states to the user. You'll need colors for success, green, warnings, yellow-orange, and errors, red. You may also need additional accent colors for things like highlighting new features or color-coding items in a chart. You'll want a full range of shades for these as well. In total, a complex UI can easily require 50 to 100 different colors. Define your shades up front. Don't create variations of a color on the fly. This leads to having dozens of slightly different shades of blue that are impossible to manage. Instead, define a fixed set of shades for each color in your palette ahead of time. A good system is to number them, for example, from blue 100, lightest, to blue 900. Here's a practical way to build a palette. 1. Choose the base color. Start by picking the middle shade, e.g., blue 500. This should be a color that works well for a primary button. 2. Find the edges. Next, pick the darkest shade, blue 900, which should be legible as text, and the lightest shade, blue 100, which could work as a subtle background tint. 3. Fill in the gaps. With the middle and edges defined, fill in the remaining shades by choosing colors that feel like a good visual step between their neighbors. This is not an exact science. You have to trust your eyes. But having this system in place makes choosing colors effortless and ensures consistency. Don't let lightness kill your saturation. In the HSL model, as a color's lightness approaches pure black, 0%, or pure white, 100%, it naturally appears less saturated. A color with 50% saturation looks much more colorful at 50% lightness than it does at 90% lightness. To prevent your lighter and darker shades from looking washed out, you need to increase the saturation as you move away from 50% lightness. What if your base color is already at 100% saturation? You can't increase it further. The trick is to rotate the hue. Different hues have different perceived brightnesses. Yellow is naturally brighter than blue. To make a color look lighter without washing it out, you can rotate its hue slightly towards a brighter neighbor on the color wheel, yellow, cyan, or magenta. To make it darker, rotate it towards a darker neighbor, red, green, or blue. This technique, used subtly, can make your color palettes feel much richer and more vibrant. Grays don't have to be gray. True gray has 0% saturation. But in UI design, your grays will almost always look better if they have a slight hint of color. This is what makes some grays feel cool and others feel warm. Cool grays. To create a cool, modern, or techie feel, add a small amount of blue saturation to your gray palette. Warm grays. To create a warmer, more traditional or comfortable feel, add a small amount of yellow or orange saturation. By tinting your grays, you can create a more cohesive and sophisticated color scheme where all the colors feel like they belong to the same family. Accessible doesn't have to mean ugly.
Web content accessibility guidelines require a minimum color contrast ratio to ensure text is readable for everyone. For colored text on colored backgrounds, this can be tricky to achieve without making the design look bad. Here are 2 tricks for creating accessible color combinations. 1. Flip the contrast. Instead of using light text on a dark-colored background, try using dark-colored text on a light-colored background. A light tint is much less visually overpowering than a dark, saturated background, making it easier to maintain hierarchy while still meeting contrast requirements. 2. Rotate the hue. If you need to put colored text on a colored background, e.g. secondary text in a panel, it can be hard to achieve enough contrast just by adjusting lightness. Instead, try rotating the hue of the text color towards a brighter color, like yellow or cyan. This increases the perceived brightness difference, helping you meet the contrast requirement without making the text pure white. Don't rely on color alone. Color can be a great tool to enhance information, but you should never use color as the only way to communicate something important. If you do, users with color blindness may not be able to understand your interface. For example, if you use red and green to indicate negative and positive trends, you should also include icons like up and down arrows or text labels. If you're using different colors for lines on a graph, try to also differentiate them using other means, such as using different line styles, solid, dashed, dotted, or by ensuring there's a strong light-dark contrast between them. Color should always be used to support information that is already being communicated through text, shape, or icons. Chapter 6. Creating Depth. This chapter explores how to use light, shadow, and layering to create a sense of depth and make interfaces feel more tangible and organized. Emulate a light source. Our brains are hardwired to understand how light and shadow work in the real world. You can use this to your advantage to make UI elements feel either raised off the page or inset into it. The fundamental rule is to assume light comes from above and slightly to the side. Raised elements. To make an element like a button feel raised, you need to mimic how it would be lit. The top edge, angled towards the light, would catch more light and appear slightly brighter. The bottom edge would cast a small, dark shadow. You can create this effect with a light-colored top border or an inset shadow and a dark box shadow below the element. Inset elements. To make an element like a text input feel recessed, you reverse the effect. The top edge of the well would be in shadow, while the bottom edge, angled up towards the light, would be highlighted. You can achieve this with a dark inner shadow at the top and a light-colored bottom border. By consistently applying this simple light from above model, you can create a convincing and intuitive sense of depth. Use shadows to convey elevation. Shadows are not just for decoration, they are a powerful tool for communicating an element's position on a virtual z-axis. The properties of a shadow tell the user how close an element is to them. Small, sharp shadows, small blur radius, small offset, make an element feel like it's only slightly raised from the background. This is good for elements like buttons that should be noticeable but not dominant. Large, soft shadows, large blur radius, larger offset, make an element feel like it's floating much higher above the page. This is great for elements like modal dialogues or drop-down menus that need to command the user's attention. To ensure consistency, establish an elevation system with a predefined set of about 5 shadow styles, ranging from a subtle, low-elevation shadow to a large, high-elevation one. You can then apply these consistently based on how much you want an element to pop. Shadows can have 2 parts. If you inspect the shadows on many well-designed websites, you'll often see that they are created using 2 box shadow properties, not 1. This is a technique used to create more realistic and nuanced shadows. Each shadow has a specific job. 1. The ambient shadow. The first shadow is a large, soft, and subtle shadow with a significant vertical offset. It mimics the soft, diffuse shadow cast by a distant light source. 2. The key shadow. The second shadow is a tighter, darker, and more defined shadow with a very small offset and blur radius. It simulates the small, crisp shadow directly underneath an object where even ambient light can't reach. Combining these two gives you the best of both worlds, a soft, airy feel from the large shadow and clear definition from the small one. As an element's elevation increases, the small, dark key shadow should become more subtle or disappear entirely, just as it would in the real world. Even flat designs can have depth. Flat design doesn't mean a design has to be completely devoid of depth. The most effective flat designs still use visual cues to create a sense of layers and hierarchy. They just do it without using realistic gradients or shadows. Here are a few ways to create depth in a flat design. Color. Lighter objects feel closer to us, while darker objects feel farther away. You can make an element feel raised by giving it a background color that is slightly lighter than the main page background. Conversely, you can make it feel inset by making it slightly darker. Solid shadows. Instead of a soft, blurred shadow, you can use a solid, hard-edged shadow with no blur and a small offset. This creates a stylized, graphic sense of depth that fits perfectly with a flat aesthetic. Overlap elements to create layers. One of the most powerful and intuitive ways to create depth is to overlap elements. When one element sits on top of another, our brain immediately perceives them as being on different layers. You can make a card feel like it's floating above a background by letting it partially overlap the boundary between two different background sections. You can also make an image or icon break out of its container, overlapping the elements around it. This technique adds a dynamic, three-dimensional quality to the design and can make a simple layout feel much more engaging and sophisticated. When overlapping images, a useful trick is to give them an invisible border that matches the background color, to create a clean separation and prevent them from clashing. Chapter 7. Working with Images. This chapter provides guidance on how to effectively incorporate photography and icons into your designs to enhance, rather than detract from, the user experience. Use good photos. This is the simplest but most important rule. Bad photos will ruin an otherwise great design. If your project requires photography, you have two options. 1. Hire a professional. If you need specific, high-quality photos that are unique to your brand, there is no substitute for hiring a professional photographer. They understand lighting, composition, and color in a way that is essential for great results. 2. Use high-quality stock photos. For more generic needs, there are many excellent stock photo websites, including free ones like Unsplash. Whatever you do, don't design an entire interface using beautiful placeholder images and then assume you can just swap in some quick photos taken with your phone. The quality difference will be jarring and will undermine all of your design work. Text needs consistent contrast. Placing text on top of a background image is a classic design challenge. The problem is that most photos have both very light areas and very dark areas, making it impossible to find a single text color that is readable everywhere. To solve this, you need to reduce the dynamic range of the image to create a more consistent background for your text. Add an overlay. The simplest solution is to place a semi-transparent black or white overlay on top of the image. A black overlay will darken the light spots, making white text readable. A white overlay will lighten the dark spots, making dark text readable. Lower the image contrast. A more nuanced approach is to directly lower the contrast of the image itself in a photo editor. This brings the light and dark areas closer together. Colorize the image. You can create a strong, branded look by colorizing the image. This typically involves desaturating the photo and then applying a solid color fill using a multiply blend mode. Add a text shadow.
A subtle, soft text shadow with a large blur radius and no offset can act as a glow around your letters, increasing local contrast just enough to make the text pop without significantly altering the image. Everything has an intended size. Not all images can be scaled to any size, even if they are vectors. Every image, from an icon to a screenshot, has an intended size at which it looks best. Don't scale up small icons. Icons designed to be used at 16 to 24px will look chunky, simplistic, and unprofessional when blown up to a large size. They lack the necessary detail. If you need a large icon, use one that was specifically designed as an illustration, or enclose the small icon within a larger colored shape.
Don't scale down detailed images. If you take a full-size screenshot of your app and shrink it down, all the text and details will become illegibly small. If you need to show a screenshot in a small space, either take a screenshot of a smaller portion of the UI or redraw a simplified version of it that communicates the layout without all the tiny detail. Redraw for tiny sizes. For very small use cases, like a favicon, the 16 by 16px icon in a browser tab, you cannot simply shrink your main logo. It will turn into an unreadable mush. You must redraw a super simplified, pixel-perfect version of your logo that is specifically designed to be clear at that tiny size. Beware user-uploaded content. When your interface relies on images uploaded by users, you lose all control over quality, cropping, and color. While you can't guarantee every image will be great, you can take steps to prevent them from completely breaking your layout. Control the shape and size. Don't display user-uploaded images at their original aspect ratio. This will create a messy, jagged layout. Instead, display them inside fixed-size containers and use CSS to make the image act as a background image with background size cover. This will crop the images to fit your layout, creating a clean and uniform grid. Prevent background bleed. Sometimes a user will upload an image, like a product photo, on a white background that has the same background color as your UI. This can cause the image to bleed into the page, losing its shape. Instead of adding a border, which can clash with the photo, use a subtle inner box shadow. This creates a clean edge that defines the image's boundary without being distracting. Chapter 8. Finishing Touches. This chapter is about the small, final details that can elevate a good design to a great one, transforming it from functional to polished and delightful. Supercharge the defaults. You don't always need to add new elements to make a design more interesting. Often, the best approach is to take the standard, default UI elements that are already there and give them a supercharged treatment. Bulleted lists. Instead of using the default black dots, replace them with custom icons. Check marks or arrows are great generic options, but you can also use icons that are specific to your content, e.g., a padlock icon for a list of security features. Quotes. For a testimonial, don't just put the quote in italics. Make the quotation marks huge and colorful, turning them into a prominent visual element. Forms. Custom-styled checkboxes and radio buttons are an easy way to inject your brand's personality and color into an otherwise boring form. Links. Go beyond just changing the color. Try giving links a thick, colorful, custom underline that adds a unique flair. These small enhancements show a high level of care and can make the entire interface feel more cohesive and custom-designed. Add color with accent borders. If you're not a graphic designer and don't have access to custom illustrations or photography, it can be hard to know how to add visual flair to your designs. A simple but incredibly effective trick is to use colorful accent borders. This involves adding a thin or thick colored line to parts of your interface to add a pop of color and visual interest. You can place them across the top of a card, along the side of an alert message, e.g., a green border for a success message, underneath a headline, to highlight an active navigation item.
even across the very top of your entire page layout. It's a simple, geometric solution that requires no artistic talent but goes a long way toward making a design feel more polished and deliberate. Decorate your backgrounds. Even a well-structured design can sometimes feel a bit plain or sterile. A great way to add visual texture and break up monotony is to decorate your backgrounds. Change the background color. The simplest approach is to use a different background color for a specific panel or for an entire section of a page to create visual separation. A subtle gradient can also add energy. Use a repeating pattern. Add a subtle, low-contrast repeating pattern, like those from a site like Hero Patterns, to a background. This can add a tactile quality to the design. Add simple shapes or illustrations. Instead of a full pattern, you can place a few simple geometric shapes or a large, low-contrast illustration, like a simplified world map, in the background. The key with all of these techniques is to keep the contrast between the decoration and the background very low, so it adds texture without interfering with the readability of the foreground content.
Don't overlook empty states. An empty state is what the user sees when there is no data to display yet, e.g., an empty inbox or a project with no tasks. It's a user's very first experience with a feature, and it's a critical design opportunity that is often overlooked. Don't just show a "no items found" message. A great empty state should do 3 things. 1. Educate. Briefly explain what the feature does. 2. Delight. Use a nice illustration, icon, or friendly message to make a good first impression. 3. Guide. Provide a clear, prominent call to action, like a big "Create Your First Project" button, to show the user what to do next. If the UI normally has filters or tabs, consider hiding them in the empty state, as they are useless until there is content. Treat your empty states as a crucial part of the user onboarding experience. Use fewer borders. When you need to separate elements, a border is often the first tool designers reach for. However, using too many borders can make an interface feel busy, cluttered, and fragmented. Borders are just one tool for creating separation. Try these alternatives first. 1. Use a box shadow. A subtle box shadow can outline an element and lift it off the background, creating separation without the hard line of a border. This works best when the element has a different background color than the page. 2. Use different background colors. Simply giving adjacent elements slightly different background colors is often enough to distinguish them. If you're already doing this, you probably don't need a border as well. 3. Add extra spacing. The most elegant way to create separation is often to just add more space. Increasing the space between groups of elements clearly distinguishes them without adding any new UI at all. Think outside the box. We have a lot of preconceived notions about how certain UI components are supposed to look. A drop-down is a list of links. A table is a grid of text. Radio buttons are little circles. But these are just conventions, not rules. Challenge your assumptions and look for opportunities to be creative. Drop-downs. Who says a drop-down has to be a boring list? It's just a floating box. You can put anything in it: multiple columns, icons, supporting text, section headers. Tables. Does every piece of data need its own column? If 2 related pieces of data don't need to be sorted independently, maybe you can combine them into a single column with a more interesting visual hierarchy. You can also add images or color-coded tags to enrich the data. Radio buttons. Instead of a list of text with little circles, why not use a set of large, selectable cards? This can make an important choice much more visually engaging and satisfying to interact with. Don't let convention hold back your designs. Breaking the rules thoughtfully is often what takes a design to the next level. Chapter 9: Leveling Up. This final chapter offers advice on how to continue improving your design skills long after finishing the book. Look for decisions you wouldn't have made. The key to learning from other people's work is to actively analyze it. Whenever you see a design you admire, don't just think, that looks nice. Instead, ask yourself, did the designer do anything here that I never would have thought to do? Maybe it's a small, clever detail, like positioning a search button inside the text input instead of next to it. Maybe it's a stylistic choice, like using two different font colors within a single headline to create emphasis. Or maybe it's a structural decision, like using an inverted background color for a date picker. By paying close attention to these unintuitive yet effective decisions, you actively discover new patterns and ideas that you can add to your own toolkit. Rebuild your favorite interfaces. The single best way to understand the subtle details that make a design great is to try and recreate it from scratch. Don't peek at the code or use an inspector tool. Just open a design tool and try to replicate the interface pixel by pixel using only your eyes. This process forces you to solve the same problems the original designer solved. You'll struggle to get your version to look as good as the original, and in figuring out why, you'll discover the hidden tricks they used. You'll realize on your own that you need to decrease the line height for headings, add letter spacing to uppercase text, or combine multiple shadows to get that effect. This hands-on mimicry is an incredibly powerful way to internalize new techniques and develop a keen eye for the details that truly matter. By continually studying and recreating the work that inspires you, you will be leveling up your design skills for years to come. That's all for this episode of Geek Capsule. We hope it gave you a fresh perspective on the world of technology. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment or share your feedback. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and join us next time for another essential read. Until then, keep your curiosity sparked and your mind open.